Well, welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to stretch your legs, get rid of Zoom fatigue, because now we're gonna hit it and go pretty quickly. So what we want to do now, as I mentioned, is introduce the special issue that was recently published in Small Business Economics on religion and entrepreneurship. So what we're going to do is take about an hour, 15 minutes to spend talking about the overview and the motivation of the issue, and then step into the specific papers, beginning with the introductory paper that Niels and Elco are going to share with us, and then move through several of the papers that are part of the special issue. So last year, we had the special issue panel here to talk about the upcoming special issue. Now the work's been done, the papers are in, and it's actually published. So Elco van Burg and Niels Rietveld, two of the special issue editors, are here with us to share a bit about the overview of the issue and then to share their introductory paper. So I will hand it over to Elco and Niels, and welcome. Thank you for your important work in the field.
Yeah, Brett, thanks very much for the opportunity to present the special issue on religion and entrepreneurship here today. Last year, we have indeed been with you to discuss the progress with the special issue, but we were able to publish it last year, November. It was a journey of a bit more than 2 years, so we will take some 10 minutes to reflect on that in light of the introductory article of the special issue, and then the authors of the articles in the SI will present their specific work. So here we have the 5 editors of the special issue. It's Elco, who's with us today, Frank Jansen, Brigitte Hogendoorn, Marcus Desjardins, and myself. Yeah, here it works. So we titled our introductory article, Coupling Engagement with Analytical Rigor, Advancing Research on Religion and Entrepreneurship Using a Mechanism-Based Approach. So we got a lot of submissions for the special issue. And what we really liked is the engagement we noticed with the research topic. Engagement scholarship is a good thing. And we reflect on that in the introductory article. But what we also noticed is that in many submissions, the engagement came at the expense of analytical rigor. So there was not sufficient distance from the research topic to draw correct conclusions. So we reflect on that, stating that values and your engagement, that's a good thing to define the research question, but in conducting the research, you should take sufficient distance. So that's value neutrality. So we argue for analytical rigor in this field of research, and then we propose to focus and test specifically for mechanisms in this relationship, because in many submissions we saw hypotheses implicitly assuming the existence of particular mechanisms, so why X is related to Y in a positive fashion, but without explicit testing of this mechanism. And that's what we argue for. And for that, we also provide a framework. On the one hand, religion, on the other hand, entrepreneurship, but you see the arrows going around. So we reflect on the relationships going from religion to entrepreneurship and the other way around. And perhaps you notice the concepts, the words in the middle: believing, bonding, behaving, and belonging. These are dimensions typically used in research on religion to distinguish different dimensions of religion. But we also map them on entrepreneurship because we think it's relevant to also distinguish entrepreneurship in this regard. So believing then is about specific knowledge and beliefs, bonding about commitment, behaving about norms and values, and belonging about social capital. So just to give an example, the fact that you belong to a particular religion may make that you serve clients that also belong to that religion, but may also hamper the growth of your business beyond that set of clients. But the other way around, being part or an entrepreneurial community may also have a bearing on how religion organizations are being shaped. That's actually one of the topics of one of the articles in the SI. So here I have an overview of all the articles in the special issue. In the end, we were able to publish 4. First one, the Protestant ethic and entrepreneurship inside the black box. So here we really dig into specific mechanisms. In light of the framework, it's about the behaving dimension and then behaving dimension of religion, which has then a bearing on entrepreneurship. The second and third contribution are in the believing dimension, also from religion to entrepreneurship. Well, we will hear more about these contributions today. And the final one is about entrepreneurship in religious organizations, how the Church of England developed an entrepreneurial orientation. And the author of this contribution is also with us today. That fits nicely into the behaving dimension, but it's special in the sense that here the analysis is on the relation from entrepreneurship to religion. And that's quite special because in the introductory article, we're also looking ahead. So how can we further develop the field? We provide some main research questions, so to say, for each of the dimensions, but also for each of the directions. So from religion to entrepreneurship and the other way around. I cannot cover them all today, but the ones in the red box are most interesting, we think, because there's not so much research on that yet. So research on the relation from entrepreneurship to religion. But well, happily, we will hear one study on this relationship today by Ruben. So that's it, actually, if it concerns the introductory article. If there are questions, well, about the contents or the editorial process, then perhaps there's room for 1 or 2, and otherwise we can continue.
Yeah, Niels, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Niels and Elco, I wonder if you could just take a half a step back as you looked across the field. You gave us some perspective on kind of what you saw across the submissions. Tell us anything you saw that was particular. So we hear some of the deficiencies, some of the needs to sort of increase rigor. Tell us about some of the encouraging things that you saw. What was it within either these articles or articles beyond this that maybe didn't make the final submission that you're like, oh, this is really interesting in terms of sort of moving the field forward?
I can maybe share something, Brett, and thanks again for the invite to present that. I think what we found kind of a pity is that, let's say, the other perspectives from other religions. So in the end, all articles that we included were from Christianity, and that was, well, they had much more diverse submission base. And I think what's one of the interesting movements is to look into specific religions and what that means for entrepreneurial behavior from that religion. And let's say in terms of risk taking or opportunity, beliefs, or maybe commitments. I think those are, then we get more to the mechanisms that religion creates. What we have seen a lot is studies that take those world value studies and then aggregate things on a micro dimension, and that's done a lot. But let's say moving towards the micro and look into specific behaviors and beliefs, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and there's actually nice work. So it was not that we didn't see nice work, we just saw a lot of work that was not publishable, let's say, in 2 or 3 revision rounds. So it'll definitely come out in other journals in the future. We definitely believe that.
Okay, I think there's a question in the chat. If you could maybe say, it says, thanks for the overview. I'm curious from your experience working with presumably diverse reviewers and the challenges there. Any suggestions for future authors as they prepare their manuscripts for this growing area, recognizing, you know, diversity of religion and some of the challenges of publishing in this space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what also Niels reflect on, what we've seen a lot is a lot of very engaged authors that, and rightfully so, were engaged with their own background and then argued from that for a certain viewpoint on religion. I think it's good for others to reflect on that and take methods seriously and rigor. That's what we argue, because that will put reviewers off if you are too engaged with your own background and do not a lot of work on defending the methods that you choose. Of course, we selected reviewers that were kind of well engaged with the topic. So I think we had a biased set of reviewers there that were already, let's say, buying into the issue of religion and entrepreneurship, but then of course still checking on the methodology and the outcomes, etc. So, but I think yeah, the methodology is key there, and then yeah, so it's very similar to other articles, I think. But of course, for selecting a journal, I would say well, select journals that have published things on that already, and well, most entrepreneurship journals do so. So there's definitely room for publishing similar work.
Yeah, in that respect, Small Business Economics is an econ-oriented journal publishing mostly quantitative studies. So we did get a couple of more qualitative contributions, and we took them into account, of course. But we have seen that, well, reviewers were more harsh on that, I think. So these were simply not so fitting for this journal. But as Elco already said, they might be a good fit for other type of journal, more qualitatively focused, and would fit there better.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And again, thank you for your guys' contribution. Like to step up and to have not only small business economics, but the five of you actually usher this first sort of special issue in this space, specifically in an entrepreneurship journal, really does make important strides forward for the field to recognize that there is research out there, that there is a growing base of research, and there is a way increasingly to get it into some of the top outlets in the field. And that's important, right? I hearken back to social entrepreneurship not so many years ago when it was like, oh, we can't publish social entrepreneurship in top journals. And today, like, we don't have that conversation. The hope is that by strides like this, by strides like the ERD field, that again, this becomes an important area that people are able to publish in, provided they meet all the other requirements that are required for any other sort of journal article in this field. So no, really appreciate your guys' work, all of the time and effort it took to do the special issue, to manage it. And now we'll switch over. We are going to switch over to Saulo Dubard Barbosa from EmLyon in France, where he's going to share his paper using an experimental design approach to specify exactly how and why religion affects sort of entrepreneurial action. So Saulo, we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Brett. Hope you can hear me well. Yeah. And I am going to share my screen a little bit. Brett, just wave if you can see when you can see the screen, so I can go on. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you for the invitation. This is a paper actually that was I wrote it together with Brett. It's been a long journey together, and I think connecting this back to what Niels was presenting, as it is more on the believing dimension of religion, and connecting it back to what David and Jose presented earlier. This is a paper that maybe one of the papers that is using experiments to try to push this field forward, right? So here we adopt a cognitive perspective. I don't know, I can share the link to the paper with you. It is open access thanks to L.I.F.E, so you can have the full paper. Just to move a bit quickly, here I don't need to tell you that religion has been, seen as an important influence on entrepreneurial activity and decision-making for a long time. Right. However, previous research on the influence of religion, at least till the recent years, has been sparse, fragmented, Not so much focused on theoretical development. I think that is changing, thankfully. Not so much focused on hypothesis testing. That's also changing according to Jose and David, and thankfully. Sometimes it has been inconclusive. It has produced equivocal and contradictory results. If you review past research, sometimes you have significant findings, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have a more positive influence, sometimes a more negative one. In any case, it's tricky to figure out, to actually measure the influence of religion in entrepreneurship. So our initial goal was actually to contribute to this line of research by better specifying the role of religion in opportunity judgment, right, on how people evaluate opportunities, and building upon cognitive theory. So we are adopting more of a psychological lens in this paper, okay? And of course, we wanted to do more rigorous quantitative research on the topic, right? It started with one experiment. We actually had conducted a pilot study. We presented as a pilot study. It was a previous study that we had conducted in which we asked students enrolled in entrepreneurship courses to evaluate different opportunities. We had 4 scenarios. It was a within subject experiment, so that means all participants go through all the scenarios. And we randomly assign them to different orders of the scenarios, but they see all the scenarios, right? And in this pilot study, we only manipulated opportunity queues. So basically, in the scenarios, they were asked by a friend to join a new venture, right? And in some cases, in some scenarios, 2 out of 4, they had positive cues. So they had 90% chance that a prototype will be successfully developed, 80% chance that business will receive adequate funding, 85% that the venture will have cash flow, 80% the firm will be the first in the market. And in the other 2 scenarios, we kind of reversed the probabilities and the cues to a more negative tone, highlighting the chances that the prototype will never be successfully developed, that business will not receive adequate funding, that the new venture will not have enough cash flow to stay alive, and that the firm will arrive too late in the market, right? So basically, these scenarios were objectively the same, but presented in different ways. So what we manipulated was the framing of the opportunity queues, right? When we analyzed this pilot study, what we found is, of course, as expected, we found information framing had a very significant role. When you present it in a positive way, it increases perceived feasibility and it increases perceived desirability, right? So from that pilot study, what we did was another study which became our main study in the paper. And we kind of duplicated the same experimental study, this time with business owners and investors, right? We had 95 participants in total that were part of an entrepreneurial ecosystem in the Midwest, United States. And for the main analysis, we focused on the business owners, but we did robustness checks with also the investors and prospective entrepreneurs. And what we did, we kept the same scenarios. We manipulated the opportunity queues, as I just showed it to you, but we also included a measure of religious belief integration in order to measure to which extent these entrepreneurs actually integrate their religious beliefs within their ventures, within their current business, their real business, okay? Not the venture, the fictitious venture in the scenarios, but with their current businesses. And here you can see the items of the religious belief integration scale. It was a scale that we adapted from previous religious studies, right? Actually, the original scale is called work and faith integration. So it was initially designed to measure the degree to which people integrate religious beliefs with their work, right? And it's based on Christian and Judeo-Christian beliefs mainly, which was consistent with this sample, mainly Christian entrepreneurs in our sample. And the hypothesis we had was the baseline hypothesis that's saying, well, framing will generate higher levels of perceived feasibility and perceived desirability when it's positive rather than negative, right? But we added a second hypothesis here saying, well, religious belief integration will moderate this relationship between framing and perceived feasibility and desirability, such that higher levels of religious belief integration will yield higher levels of perceived feasibility and desirability when the new venture opportunity is negatively framed. So this hypothesis was motivated based on a process of sanctification and also previous studies saying that, well, actually religious beliefs help people to cope with challenges and difficulties and uncertainty, right? And actually we found the support for this hypothesis here. I'll go through this very fast, but here you can see that the interaction of information framing and religious belief integration was significant and negative when we actually look into the different scenarios. So the negative versus the positive framed, what you can see here, if I can, yeah. What you can see here is that religious belief integration is actually positive and significant when the situation is framed negatively, right? And that happens for perceived feasibility and also for perceived, desirability as well, right? So these were the main findings. Now, when we try to plot this, just a second. So when we plot these this interaction, right? This is what we found, right? Is actually when you have negative framing, that's when religious belief integration plays a role, right? Basically enhancing the perceptions of feasibility and desirability for people that have a higher degree of religious belief integration, meaning that entrepreneurs who integrate their religious beliefs within their ventures, they tend to see negative information in a more positive way than entrepreneurs who do not integrate such beliefs. So I'll make sure I leave time for the questions, but maybe just to start discussing our main contributions, at least we hope to be contributing to specifying the role of religion in entrepreneurship, maybe reconciling previous findings. The fact is that previous research might have found contradicting results because they're overlooking these micro level variables, right? We have several studies that look at the macro level, national level, comparing religions and entrepreneurial activity at the country level, for instance. Well, when you have that data, you don't have the micro data that allows you to see actually when people integrate their religious beliefs and when they do not, right? And that plays a role. And then we want to contribute to process orientation of cognitive perspective in entrepreneurship, trying to offer a more solid cognitive model for understanding the religious influence on opportunity evaluation. We put forward this process of sanctification, basically a process through which people who have religious beliefs start making the venture or their project or the object that they're contemplating as sacred, right? And through that, having more positive lenses or more positive view of the reality. And finally, we are integrating in this paper both mental representations, framing, right? and also cognitive resources, religious beliefs. So in a way, we are looking at the surface, at how information is presented. So that's at the very perceptual level, but we are also looking at religion. We are basically capturing deep cognitive structures. So beliefs that are deeply anchored in one's psyche, right? So that's what we think we're doing there. So thank you so much. I hope we have some questions and time to discuss.
So, Saulo, thanks so much. I think what we're going to do is actually save the questions till after each of the presentations and then go into smaller breakout rooms. So there's a bit more of a smaller, more intimate kind of conversation that we can have there. So we'll go ahead and now move on to Ruben. Then afterwards, we'll break out each of the authors into a breakout room. And anyone who wants to talk to any of the authors can go directly there just to try and make the bigger conference a bit more intimate. So Ruben, we'd love to now move on to you. Ruben Van Werven from the Bayes Business School in London is here to share his paper on the Church of England, and one of the few papers who sort of, instead of religion to entrepreneurship, has entrepreneurship towards religion. So Ruben, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Brett. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruben. As Brett said, I'm based in London, UK, at Bayes Business School. And in this paper, I looked at how the Church of England, so the main Christian church in England, has adopted an entrepreneurial mindset. So let me first briefly share some of the background of this project. A colleague told me, are you familiar with the concept of church planting? I'm sure some of you here are. I wasn't at the time. So just to share a definition so that we're all on the same page, church planting is when an established church actively plants smaller churches using their main church as the base. So some congregants will be tasked with going out and starting a sort of small spin-out version of the original church. So the establishment of new Christian congregations. And especially in the US, there's quite a big ecosystem around that. There are incubator programs for church plants. There are pitching events where vicars or people who are leading a new church can try to raise money to get their initiative to come off the ground. So I found this fascinating, and I decided to see if that same sort of ecosystem was also present in the UK. I began doing some interviews with UK-based church planters who are all Church of England members at the start of 2020. What I learned from those interviews was that originally, at least, planting, the whole concept of it, used to be very controversial. It was almost seen by some of the more conservative actors within the Church of England as something that went against the very idea of being a member of the Church of England. This is not something that we do at the moment. We want people to come to us and visit us in our churches. We don't proactively go out and try to convert them. That is salesmanship, and salesmanship to us is unchristian, because that means that we assume we can convert people into Christians, which certainly is God's job to do. So us as humans cannot get involved in it. It goes against what we stand for. So people who were trying to plant churches, especially in, say, the 1990s, experienced an awful lot of resistance. And they told me lots of stories about that. So basically what they experienced when going through these activities were tensions between religious beliefs and entrepreneurial values. On the one hand, they wanted to be entrepreneurial. They wanted to set up creative new forms of church that didn't involve maybe even the book of hymns, that maybe took place outside of a church building. But yeah, as in the example I gave earlier, that was sometimes seen as very controversial. Yet, eventually, the Church of England embraced this idea of church planting and these more innovative forms of doing church and being a congregation, and even started publishing reports encouraging and promoting church plant related initiatives that took place in the United Kingdom. So some real mindset change happened there, which made me wonder, how does this process of developing an entrepreneurial orientation unfold in a religious organization such as the Church of England? And to answer that question, I decided to do a historical case study. So I went into the Church of England archives, read data, minutes of the meetings that they had, and complemented that with media data published in nationwide English newspapers, drawing on the pilot interviews that I did, but with a primary focus on General Synod documents. Now, what is the General Synod? It is one of the bodies in this very complicated Church of England organization structure that you see on this slide. So basically, it's the one that you see here. And the role that General Synod has is they are basically the parliament of this nationwide religious organization. And that parliament draws its members from all the bishops throughout the country, but also lay people who go to their local churches. And together they meet once or twice or sometimes 3 times a year to debate policy issues. So the minutes of those meetings and the reports that were presented in those meetings was the main source of my data. What did I find? Basically, in those 40 years of debates around entrepreneurship that I analyzed, there were 4 main entrepreneurial initiatives, and each of those was seen as entrepreneurial at the time, not entrepreneurial in a for-profit startup kind of sense, entrepreneurial in the sense that it was a break away from the ordinary, it was seen as creative, and even though to us it might not seem very risky, to them in the Church of England back in those days, it seemed highly risky activities. One of the earlier things that they did was announce that the 1990s were going to be the decade of evangelism. So the whole theme for that decade would be go out and spread the word of God, spread the good news. Why was this controversial? Because of what I said earlier. They were going out, they were proactive, they were selling their faith. And that was seen as a dirty thing to do back in the day. And also, it could go wrong, right? If you just sit in your church and you listen to the vicar, you're in a safe space. But if you go out and you talk to people who may not be interested in what you have to say, you might, be disappointed. Other initiative, which I mentioned earlier, that was embraced a little bit later on, was church planting. So setting up these smaller churches, not necessarily inside church buildings. They could take place in schools after hours or in coffee shops, wherever you wanted. Later on, they had a more structural entrepreneurial innovation. So the whole of England is divided into small territorial areas called parishes, and each parish has a local church. The idea here is that everyone in the country, wherever you live, has a local church in their neighborhood. No part of the country goes uncovered. Downside of that was that people who are leading a parish church sometimes see it as their territory. So they didn't want to allow anyone, even if they were also a member of the Church of England, to start a new initiative on their turf. And the innovation here was to sort of open up those boundaries a little bit, make them a little bit transparent so people could move across boundaries, creating more space for these church plants. And finally, in the recent days, Church of England has actively started divesting from churches that are not working anymore. So they're closing them. They're sometimes even selling the historic buildings and using those funds to invest in creative new ways of doing church. So what these things had in common is that they all met the traditional criteria for entrepreneurial orientation. They were seen objectively in that context as proactive, innovative, and risky. Now, all of this was not uncontroversial. I found different perspectives on all of these initiatives in 3 categories. One of them related to the need to change in the Church of England. Lots of people downplayed the decline that was going on. They said, this is something that is not unique to us. We're not doing anything wrong. All sorts of other traditional organizations are declining in membership, so nothing to worry about. The opposite perspective was, there is a need to do something about this. We might be non-existent if the trend continues. We need to start changing our mindset and start thinking about how we can grow in areas that we're not active in. There were ideas related to the governance and the purpose of the church. Some people believe that the church should serve the common good and should mainly focus on helping those who are in need. Whereas later on, the mindset shifted more towards evangelism. One of the things that we can do to help people who are in need is to help them, but also make them into new disciples. So their logic was much more one of going out and being entrepreneurial. And finally, people disagreed on who had the decision-making power within the church. Is this God who decides who becomes a Christian and how church is going to be run? Or can humans actually play a role in God's mission, setting up these new initiatives and helping God with his work? So these were competing views. Now, my main question was, how did these views change? I think one of the mechanisms that I found was what I call polysemy dynamics. So polysemy is defined as the use of words and concepts that are a bit ambiguous, that support multiple meanings. And in my data, how ambiguous or how multi-interpretable certain words were fluctuated over time. Key words were understood more broadly or more narrowly. Take evangelism, for example. In the early stages, this was seen as anything could be evangelism. Because of that, it was often interpreted in very safe ways. We'll pray and ask God if he can help us bring more people into church. A lot of people were annoyed by that because it was too vague, it was not actionable enough. So the definition narrowed. Evangelism became almost synonymous with church planting. Evangelism is planting new churches around the country, which made a lot of people very angry because they felt that their initiatives were no longer recognized. So after that, the definition broadened up a little bit. Evangelism was not just planting new churches, it was any sort of new way of doing churches, which they called doing church, which was called a fresh expression. Later on, it narrowed a little bit more and the focus on growth came back in. Not just any fresh expression, not just any new initiative, it's initiatives that are targeting growth. What I think this means is that obviously this delayed the process, these constant debates, it delayed the process of becoming entrepreneurial, but it also kept people on board. The people who thought something was too vague and didn't give them enough guidance, they were helped when the definition narrowed. People who thought that narrow definitions were almost dictatorial, telling them what to do, they were kept on board by definitions widening again. Second mechanism, and I'm sorry, I'm conscious of time, I'm rushing, idea sedimentation. So certain ideas that were discussed, even if they were rejected, never completely disappeared. They might have been buried temporarily, but they always resurfaced. So advocates of evangelistic and entrepreneurial action, they justified their proposals by referring to the past. They said, we've been talking about this for many, many years now, but we never act. It's time to really do something. Or they refer to previously established consensus or successes achieved by already introduced entrepreneurial initiatives. So what happened here was that even though the debates took time and ideas were often rejected before they got accepted, because of that sort of collective memory that was being used by people who were pro-evangelism, they could keep on moving because there was more and more material that they could draw on to justify their plans. So contributions, I hope to contribute to first of all, to the literature on entrepreneurship and religion, which in my reading mostly studies a linear link between entrepreneurship and religion, either at the individual level or the macro national level. And what I think or hope to have shown is that organizational level is also interesting to study. Plus, the relationship doesn't necessarily have to be linear only from religion to entrepreneurship. It can be recursive. In my case, as maybe you have taken from my examples, the way religion was experienced was shaped by the successes of these new entrepreneurial ways of exercising the Church of England's faith. Finally, I also aim to contribute a little bit to the entrepreneurial orientation literature, which doesn't really say a lot about the process of EO development and not much about religious organizations either. So my analysis suggests that an entrepreneurial orientation does not just emerge when the right conditions are in place, but in fact, especially in religious settings, can be a very lengthy and contested process. sorry for overrunning. That was me. I'm looking forward to talking more later.
Ruben, thank you so much. It would not be right if we didn't have at least one academic sort of just spill over just a tiny bit in time. But the paper is fascinating, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. Once again, afterwards we will have breakout rooms for each of the authors. So if you have specific questions, we'll have a chance to sort of step into those rooms and talk to them directly. Finally, we will have Jessica Jones present her paper with Christina Heimer, Ashley Roccapiori, and so I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you for having us, everybody. It's wonderful to see many of you. I would be remiss without starting this off by thanking the co-author team who put this together, the Center for L.I.F E, who also provided the opportunity to share this study today, and then the editors and reviewers who are incredibly developmental as we were working through this study. So I'm excited to offer the opportunity and hopefully spur up some conversation that we have for later today. This study looks at actually angel investors. So rather than thinking about, we've talked about entrepreneurs a lot today, but investors, as we know, are also a large part of the venturing process. So we look at how religion actually impacts the decision-making of investors. And so as we know from today, and I don't need to preach to the choir or belabor the point, but we've noticed this uptick in the sense that religion is important in the context of decision making, as David had articulated, but it's often overlooked in the aspect of investor decision making. And it's especially relevant, however, for those like angel investors who are investing their own money at early stages, and so they hence have a lot of more discretion over how and what they invest in. They rely on both economic and non-economic information. And more importantly, they also prioritize their intuitive assessments of the entrepreneur and symbolic meaning. So in many ways, religion can be such an influential factor, but we've kind of overlooked it or just shoved it under the table. And one reason might be is because, well, as we've unpacked today, it's quite complicated. Early nascent research on religion in investor decision-making it shows that in the sense that the same context of religion can both exacerbate or mitigate in two different studies an investor's risk aversion. So when we look to the literature, we started to unpack that, and some of the themes that Nathan had articulated, as well as others today, has noticed that religion can be both a guiding institutional logic or and a personal belief. But oftentimes we study one or the other. And what we mean by that is here, at least, when we talk about institutional logics, those would be those broad belief systems that shape what is legitimate. So that's thinking about the culture or the region and how they measure. And Nathan articulated all of that data that we have to suggest that those things can and in fact be studied. At the same time, it's also a personal belief, as our other studies have shown. And so to the extent that in which investors are using one or the other, how might they interact with one another? And that's kind of what we're looking at here. It's also complicated because investors evaluate two things. They're looking at the entrepreneur and the venture, but often studies are looking at one or the other. And so we wanted to see if we could tease out some of those interactive effects. And so in essence, our research question then here for this paper was, how does religion as both a guiding institutional logic and a personal belief influence angel investor decision-making? And I want to spend a couple minutes here on the research context, not only because I'm a qualitative person by heart, but I think it was really profoundly important for this study, this design, and for the submission at SBE, in that our co-author team has spent a lot of time in the angel investor and investor decision-making kind of context. And so what I started to notice in the world of impact investing was that there started to be an emerging group of individual investors who called and proclaimed themselves to be making faith-based investing. And what was interesting about the phenomena is that, you know, as an investor where you are primarily focused on economic decision-making, this whole question of how do you even think about what a faith-driven investment would look like? How would you measure it? How do you define yourself? The emerging group investors started to reveal different webinars that were related to this, lots of books, and even specific groups that were focused on this explicit notion of faith-driven investing. And so our data partner ended up being the leader of a faith-based and faith-driven angel investing group, which was part of our first study. But what they helped us reveal is first we started to do a lot of interviews around how do we get at, is this an institutional logic or is it a belief that's driving some of these faith-related decisions? And what those interviews kind of revealed and those conversations revealed was that, well, it's a bit more complicated and there's a lot of intuition in some of these early judgments. And so what our data partner helped us design was a scenario where investors would evaluate those initial judgments of a venture and the entrepreneur and their venture. And so we started with a study of this group of angel investors who were part of a faith-driven group. And based on similarity attraction, we kind of suggested that, well, it's kind of intuitive in the notion that if an entrepreneur makes claims, religious claims about their venture, that the investors would evaluate that positively. But to get at and unpack some of those nuances of logics or beliefs, we hypothesized essentially that the investor, upon seeing religious claims, would evaluate both the venture and the entrepreneur. And not only because they are part of this religious group or that's making explicit claims to be faith-driven in their investment, they also might vary in their investor religiosity. We used a similar scale that Saulo and Brett used, the Faith at Work scale, to test that investor religiosity. So here we try to look at a more complicated model of religion and its impact on investor evaluations. And what we find, in fact, is that it is quite nuanced. In this first study, while we thought and everything was directionally consistent that faith entrepreneurs or faith-driven investors evaluate entrepreneurs who make religious claims positively, it was quite nuanced. Here's quickly a brief look at the method that we used. We used multi-level structural equational modeling. We used 4 different scenarios, and the investors received something that looked like this. What we manipulated was the company mission and its explicit notion of being faith-driven. Quick sidebar, these were Christian claims that are made here, and all of the investors were Christian, so there was alignment there. And so our results for the first study, in fact, were, as I mentioned, directionally consistent, but interestingly enough, the venture was evaluated positively only if they first evaluated the entrepreneur themselves as authentic. So we have a fully mediated model here, which was interesting to ourselves because there was this slight nuance. Now then we asked ourselves, well, what about contexts where religious values are unknown? Would the same claims that entrepreneurs make about their ventures be maybe, instead of seen as attractive, this double-edged sword effect of being a bit repelling? And so we took a study or a sample of traditional angel investors, and using expectation violation theory, we theorized that those religious claims would actually conflict and negatively impact angel investor evaluations. So we used the same model, but hypothesized the opposite on those first effects. And we actually found that that was, in fact, supported. And so not to belabor the point here, but what was interesting is that I think in terms of speaking to some of the notion of beliefs in this context of traditional angel investors, where it is unknown to an entrepreneur whether or not that investor is religious, when those entrepreneurs make claims about their venture that are religious, yes, it's a repelling effect, but that repelling effect was actually mitigated if the investor, in fact, had their own level of religiosity that was high. So that speaks again to that interaction of investor beliefs versus logics. And so if I'm going to go ahead and get to some of the takeaways here, the first is that we find religion is a double-edged sword. The second is that it influences multiple levels of analysis, so both the entrepreneur and the venture. The third is that it's both cognitive and cultural by way of the investor. Is it the group or the person? And we hope that today and perhaps future questions can open up that black box of investor decision-making. Some future research directions that I hope we can have in further conversations are related to the validity and generalizability across religions within different types of decision-making contexts. And this idea of how much faith is enough to get across the door. So this concept of thinking about legitimacy thresholds and getting to some of those nuances. With that, I'd like to thank the L.I.F.E conference again. This is a QR code to the article, but Amanda and others have been fantastic about sharing those links. So I appreciate the time and I look forward to future conversations.
Yes, thanks so much for sharing. What we're going to now do in the interest of time, we've got about 25 minutes. We're going to open up 4 breakout rooms for each of the 4 papers that were presented and give any of the participants a chance to go into those breakout rooms and interact directly, of course, with each other, but also with the authors of the paper to have specific, more direct sort of conversation. We'll run that till about 11:45 Eastern time, at which point we'll close those rooms. We'll take a 15-minute break. And at the top of 12 o'clock Eastern time, we will come back with both the entrepreneurship and regional development special issue, and then roll into the panel about the challenges and opportunities of publishing in this space. So the 4 rooms are now open. If you want to select a room, please go into that. You're welcome to be there as long as you like. And then we will break about 11:45 and then start again at the top of the hour.